I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. A previous guest, Dan Gardner, spoke about forecasting and risk. One of his central points was, as he put it, the things we're doing now are so incredibly complex, to see even a little bit into the future takes an enormous amount of struggle, and even then we're going to make mistakes. As CEO of Newroll, predicting just 12 months out is hard. As we expand, variables and risks multiply. Anything I can do to take risk off the table is helpful. In the past, I've been blind to the risk of FX exposure in our budgeting. A small movement could eat into our investment budget and compromise our credibility when our forecasts are wrong. If you want to remove risk from your foreign exchanges without breaking the bank, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, a board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. From navigating explosive boardroom crises to overseeing strategic transformation at Rolls-Royce during its most turbulent decade, Carl-Peter Forster has sat at the helm of some of the UK's most critical industrial institutions, including currently as Chair of Vesuvius plc and Keller Group plc, and Senior Independent Director at Babcock International Group plc. Previously, he was Chair of Keller Group plc, Senior Independent Director of IMI plc, and Non-Executive Director of Wrexham plc and Rolls-Royce plc. Earlier in his career, he held senior leadership positions at BMW, General Motors, and Tata Motors. Today, he joins us to share the hard-won lessons every board member should know, but few ever speak about. Carl-Peter, a huge welcome, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Reading that incredible list of accolades feels a bit like a this is your life moment.
Perhaps it's a summary. Hopefully not yet. There's more to come.
Can we start with your view as an executive in the boardroom? Curious to hear, what have been the 3 board experiences you've had as an executive that have most shaped how you operate today as a non-executive?
The first one was at BMW. I was appointed a management board member in 1999. And my experience was that my world of an orderly progression within the organization based on performance was suddenly has come to an end. It became very political. Actually, I had 3 mentors: the CEO, the most important management board member who was responsible for research, development, and sales and marketing, and the chairman. They were my mentors. They coached me and mentored me. They were gone within a period of 3 months. Suddenly, a new chairman and a new CEO came up, and I was simply not on their team. I wasn't their man. And that ended my career at BMW. So it became suddenly very political. It had nothing to do with my performance. I asked, do you have a problem with my performance? No, they didn't have a problem with my performance. It was simply, I don't know, I wasn't their man. That was quite an interesting experience. And the second one was certainly managing the General Motors European operation through the 2009 and 2008-9 crisis, where basically General Motors was running out of cash, was bailed out by the US government. The US government basically became the largest, if not the main shareholder of General Motors for a while. That changed the agenda quite significantly. General Motors decided to sell the European operation, which I was at the helm of. I had to find a buyer, which I did. I had to negotiate a bridge loan with the German government, with Mrs. Merkel personally, which we succeeded in. And then suddenly General Motors, the mothership, was pulled through a Chapter 11 process, was recapitalized, shed off all the bad assets, quite a few, by the way. And suddenly the agenda changed. And after a very strange process, they suddenly decided, and we had a buyer, by the way, we found a buyer, and the contracts had been negotiated, were ready to be signed. And suddenly they decided not to sell in a very strange way. That was obviously a very turbulent time, but it was also a very stressful time. I had to make sure that the European operations did not run bankruptcy, but basically was staying afloat. But nobody ever said, thank you very much, Carl-Peter, for keeping our European boat afloat. It was a very strange situation. It had nothing to do with strategy. It had to do with people and people in a very difficult environment and a difficult situation, how they behaved and how they acted. So those were probably my most difficult sort of CEO experiences. The third one was at Tata Motors. I joined Tata Motors soon after the crisis. Tata had 3 businesses, commercial vehicles in India, passenger cars in India, and Jaguar Land Rover. I was in charge of all 3 of them. On the passenger car side, they had launched the Nano, which was the budget car. It was initially priced as 100,000 rupees, about 1,500 pounds, 1,700 pounds. It was seen as a revolution, but it was a complete marketing failure because a member of the emerging middle class in any developing country, or like India, they do not want to be seen in a car which is deemed cheap. They want to be seen in a car in an automobile which has status. And the Nano didn't have status. So we simply couldn't sell the car with all we tried. And then the car burst in flames, and we found 8 root causes for the cars bursting in flames. But it was the pet project of the chairman, the late Ratan Tata. I mean, I really admire Ratan. He's absolutely great man, but it was his project, and he could not accept that it was a failure. And that made it really very difficult. Yeah, I tried to say we have to re-engineer the vehicle. We have to create almost a new visual identity of the vehicle to shed the cheap image. And he wouldn't accept it. So, and then my wife got very ill, and we decided basically to part company amicably. Ultimately, my successor tried for another half year, I think 9 months or so, and then they basically stopped production and folded the whole Nano project. So those were my 3 kind of most formative sort of experiences with boardrooms, and call it the irrationality of boardrooms and what's going on in boardrooms.
3 fantastic stories. Can we go back to that first one with BMW, where you suddenly realized you were not their man and that trust wasn't there? It's interesting. It feels like this is an archetype of challenge organizations go through that I've seen play out before. And I was talking to someone recently where they were observing it from a middle manager layer, and they were seeing all the talent go out of the organization as a new top team came in and culled everyone who wasn't their team. I'm really interested to know how you, as a board member, if you were to see a new CEO come into an organization where you were on the board and you saw them doing that, culling out the people who weren't their team, but potentially throwing out a lot of value and knowledge in the process of doing that, what would be your challenge or counsel to them in that situation, having seen it from the other side?
I think, foremost, you should try to keep your talent. I'm always of the opinion that you should try to work with good people, whether they are your people or other people's people, doesn't really matter, as long as they are good and they are loyal in the sense that they are not political and they don't go behind your back and stab you. If they are loyal, do their work, whether they are my people or not people, they should become my people. And I would expect from a CEO to have the same attitude. I think this overplaying, they are not on my team, is not helpful, is not particularly mature. It's hard to say shouldn't be accepted. If a CEO does that, how can you avoid, or how can you pull back? You can speak to him. If you're the chairman or the board, you can talk to him. But if he decides this is the way forward, it's hard to stop. So you should try to find a CEO who doesn't believe he has to basically call half the talented people because they're not on his team. No, I have the fundamental belief you should be able to work with all good people and build a relationship, a positive, constructive working relationship.
Can you argue the other side of that? Can you see a scenario where they would be justified in culling out people who are good? Perhaps, maybe is there a scenario where you need real transformation and the existing team are just too locked into their way of doing things?
There are certainly scenarios if you need a completely change of course and you believe some of the people. But the question is, would I call them then good people? There might be good people, but perhaps not the right people for the situation the company is in. That's a different situation. You have to find a team that can basically execute the strategy you agree on. But no, I'm not talking about this situation. I'm talking about this situation. Company is doing okay. New CEO comes in and he basically gets rid of people just for the sake of they are not his people. Because suddenly it is clearly political. and it's not based on performance. And if the future in the company is not based on performance, that's the signal which such a situation sends out.
The second example you talked about there was that GM crisis, and where they suddenly changed their minds and had decided not to sell the business. And you said nobody ever said thank you. Was that one of your key lessons as a board member, that continuing to look out for people and recognize, or what's your lesson there?
Really, yes. It would have been nice. A clap on the shoulder and well done, Peter. Peter, you have saved our assets in Europe would have been a nice step. Now, it was a very, very political situation in Germany. In the crisis, General Motors Europe and Opel was the first company asking for governmental support, which now in the COVID crisis, everybody asked for governmental support. In the previous financial crisis, there were actually only 2 or 3. And we were the first one. So it was a hugely political situation we were in. And the whole idea was for the German government to basically guarantee to support a sale of the European operation to a third party. They would bring in about 20% of the required capital as equity. And the balance of the 80%, the debt would have been guaranteed by the German government. So that was quite a support. So there was a great willingness of the German government to support us as long as they were okay with the new owner. A long process, had 3 potential buyers, and they were vet by the German government up to the top level. Huge political support and willingness to find a solution. It took us half a year and was very stressful. The German government leaned forward as far as they could. And then the General Motors board, in a flick of a second, in a board meeting, without any pre-warning, decided not to sell. So it was a huge political embarrassment for everybody, particularly for the then President Obama, who was still the top representative of the main shareholder of General Motors, because the US government was still holding the majority of the General Motors shares. It was a political disaster. And it was a breakdown of goodwill and a complete misunderstanding of what the German government. It was an insensitive step by the GM board to do. It was their good right not to sell, but the way how they did it was hugely embarrassing for everybody who was sort of involved, and it was a big political blow. Complete lack of understanding of the situation in Europe and what it had taken to get the German government to support the situation, sticking their heads out politically, and then journalists decide, no, thank you very much, we don't need that, without any preparation, without any pre-warning, without any political trying to preparing the ground, nothing of that. I left a day later. I had enough. It was a completely unacceptable situation. They obviously the board had no understanding of what it had taken to get the German government to support us. It was what it was.
So is the lesson for a board member listening to this who finds themselves in that situation where they're navigating complex stakeholder relationships, especially with governments, that they need to invest more in the communication? Is it sort of potentially the right decision, poorly executed?
I think first of all, you really need to have your senses out, and you really should understand what is going on in foreign countries. And if you don't understand it, find somebody who understands and can give you good advice, particularly if it's so hugely political.
Let's talk about the Tata Motors experience, which I think is a fascinating example, because on the face of it, it sounds so sensible. I mean, who wouldn't want a sort of an affordable car? What's the lesson of that sort of reassuringly expensive, the importance of being reassuringly expensive for consumers that board members listening might take from your experience there?
The point was Tata was hugely successful on commercial vehicles. You should know, and obviously in the automotive industry, it looks like it's a high-tech industry. It's all about technology and new technologies, and the next technology is particularly passenger cars. It's all about consumer marketing. You're selling a branded product to consumers. I would say there's no other consumer product which you so visibly identify yourself as a consumer with. You sit in your car, it sits in front of your house, you drive around, you meet people, and people see which car you drive. It is a visible statement of your financial means and, in many ways, of your basic beliefs. And it was interesting. I'm not so sure the guys at Tata really fully understood, because they came from commercial vehicles. And the commercial vehicle it's not completely an irrational purchase if you buy a commercial vehicle, but it's much more rational, and it's less of a status symbol. Tata has been very successful with a very low cost commercial vehicle with a payload of about 1 ton, of which they derived a 1.5 ton and a 0.5 ton vehicle. So they had a range of low-cost vehicles. Just to give you a feeling, I think this 1 ton vehicle sold at about 4,500 pounds or so. It was a huge runaway success in India. Indian is a bottom-up society. Everybody has to be commercially active because nobody's looking after you. So you somehow have to make your living. You have to basically sustain your family somehow. So everybody is commercially active, and suddenly people could buy a commercial vehicle and become a one-man logistics company if they had roughly 20% of that amount, roughly 900 pounds, and that was at most days probably 100,000 rupees, saved as equity, could go to a bank. Bank would basically that finance the balance, and you became a one-man logistics company. And for fine distribution in metro cities, basically, was a runaway success. They sold 300,000 of these annually. Just to copy-paste over the concept from a commercial vehicle to a passenger car simply doesn't work, because the consumer psychology behind it is completely different. The buyer's psychology is completely different. But I've learned my lesson with consumer goods. Okay, the consumer is a very irrational, sometimes strangely behaving sort of animal. You really need to understand that thoroughly if you make these big decisions. And it was not fully understood that people simply didn't want a car which was launched as a cheap vehicle.
I imagine one of the challenges you're facing is you've got an incredibly successful entrepreneur there who has been successful with the core business and is used to proving people wrong, seeing opportunity where others didn't. And that's often at the heart of what an entrepreneur does. And it strikes me as a really interesting challenge you face there as a board when they're convinced that there will be a way through and it's just a matter of time. And how do you now, looking back on that with the benefit of hindsight, if you're advising a board member listening to this, how do you judge whether this is just one of those times when they're wrong versus one of those times where they just need more time and they will get there eventually?
That is a tough question. I'm not so sure I have a particularly good answer to it. Not even market research. Quite often, not even market research is the answer to the game, because very often market research does get it wrong or doesn't get it right and doesn't pick it up. Exactly. And in the automotive industry, you very often have to make a proposition to consumers, not knowing exactly whether they will like it or not, because you can't ask them. They don't know what they will like next year. Not knowing what's available and not knowing whether it's a trend, they don't know whether they'll like it next year or the year after next. This is very tricky. This is the art of. I mean, there are people with experience. There is an element of experience which gives you. Some people have an intuition for it. Some people in big in agencies, sort of in advertising agencies. Some of the people have instincts. You need to find these people wherever they are, outside the company, inside the company, and listen. That would be my advice, but it's very difficult and there is no simple answer to it. Otherwise, everybody would be a consumer product star, wouldn't they?
What's interesting to me about this case, with the previous experiences you referenced, it sounds like you fell out quite badly with the rest of the board. But in this case, I think you went on to join the board. So it was obviously a much...
No, I did join. And I worked for them for 2 years, and my wife got very ill, and it basically killed me, basically shuttling, commuting between the UK, where my family lived, and my office in Mumbai. And after a few months, they basically expected from me to spend 100% of my time in India, whilst my wife was undergoing pretty severe treatment, which I couldn't do. I knew I wouldn't be able to sell the Nano. There was no way. I knew it was a lost case. And honestly, I didn't want to invest my time and not be with my wife for a lost case. But that was a pretty amicable separation, to be honest.
But was there anything that listeners might take from that? Why was that a constructive disagreement where you were able to carry on working together versus the previous ones which
they thought, I think they believed I was perhaps not committed enough to sell the Nano, and I was of the opinion you couldn't sell the Nano, and hence we said, look, it's okay. We did fine with Jaguar Land Rover, quite well actually, and we did fine with the commercial vehicle. So it wasn't a basic problem, but there was so much reputation. If you ever deal with people of Asian background, issue of face saving is such importance, and they somehow had to make a Nano a success. It was of such importance for them, and I simply couldn't see a way to it, and we sort of agreed.
Many board members quietly worry whether they're contributing enough. New Role Plus gives you expert, tailored support to build confidence, refining your value proposition, helping you build a position on key board issues, and connecting you to more rewarding opportunities. Visit plus.newrole.com to learn more. Have you developed any means to combat that face-saving risk in those sorts of boards that people listening might learn from?
The answer is no. You have to understand, you have to deal with this. I was a personal advisor to the chairman and the founder of the Geely Group for almost 10 years. It was very interesting when I had my private sessions with him every 3 to 4 or 5 months. Sometimes I came forward with a few proposals, which I thought he might want to think about. And if he liked the idea, he would tell me, "Oh, Carl-Peter, that is such a coincidence. I had the same idea yesterday." So he clearly he didn't have that idea. But equally, if he didn't like my idea, he would just gracefully move on and not make me lose my face. So it was very interesting. So you just have to read the situation, be mindful of it, and deal with this.
That sounds like a very effective way. So low ego and make it their idea, and you're off to the races.
Yeah, that's also very helpful in a Western context. If you make an idea, other people's idea, they will be very committed to following through that idea. So it can be very effective also in our sort of Western environment.
What's been the most difficult board conversation you've had as a CEO?
I think the most difficult one was clearly the situation in the financial crisis. There was so much at stake. The General Motors board had the much bigger issue of keeping the mothership afloat. It was absolutely priority number 1, 2, and 3. And the European operations were priority number 10. The board wasn't really in charge because the main shareholder was the US government, and the US government had formed a automotive task force, and the members of the automotive task force were people from hedge fund background and private equity background. That didn't make for easy discussion, I can tell you.
And you've now had the benefit of some hindsight and distance from that moment. If you were talking to someone now facing a similar situation, other than kind of trying to really understand the stakeholders better, is there any counsel you would offer them?
Look, I was pretty much left on my own device. Not much came out from the US, other than sometimes an opinion, but not much. Some people told me you need really good advice and good people helping you. So I brought in a senior consultant who became sort of a personal advisor in this situation. And probably what saved our neck was we had an extremely good communication team. My head of communication, I still call him one of the best people in that field. And we had to tactfully and thoughtfully put our case to the public in a way. But we couldn't do it in a way that was too pushy. We had to do it in a way that government still was sort of in charge, and the German government, that was basically. My advice would be in this situation, get 1, 2, 3 people who can help you. And don't underestimate the element of communication, particularly if it's such a visible, massively political case, which was in the newspaper every other day. You need somebody who's really good at that. And that is not just a communication agency. You need somebody who understands how do you put your case, is humble, sensitive, thoughtful, has good experience and good contacts. The communication element or this gentleman played extremely well. Just to give you a funny story, it was right through the middle of the crisis, March 2009. For whatever reason, Mrs. Merkel, then German Chancellor, had agreed to visit our main plant, the main Opel plant in Rüsselsheim, because of the overall situation, but perhaps because of Mrs. Merkel she didn't want to cancel that. So she did visit, and she had a town hall. The town hall was 5,000 people. And our communication director with the head of marketing had the idea to put all 5,000 people in the same yellow T-shirt with the reading on it, "We are Opel. Wir sind Opel." 5,000 people, yellow T-shirts, "We are Opel." And it was done in a way that it looked pretty sort of homemade. It wasn't like a fancy T-shirt. It was a very simple T-shirt. I think it must have impressed her quite a bit. So the combination of her visiting 5,000 people, at that meeting, she sort of committed to find a way to help Opel through the crisis. I think for whatever reason, this worked out very well, and she stood to her commitment. But somebody found a way to invite her to visit us in the crisis, which was, honestly, I don't know how we achieved that, but somebody did.
It's a recurring theme I've picked up across boards where when they get examples in front of the board are then that much more inclined to back them. And I guess that's another example of there you've got the sort of reality in front of your key decision maker there that has then influenced them emotionally probably to make a decision that had they had it in a purely sort of cold remove way, they might not have got to that outcome. Really interesting. So can we deep dive into the way you think about industrials businesses? Because you've got an amazing breadth and depth of experience in industrials. In episode 76, we had Paul Pester share the heuristics he uses for thinking about banking businesses. And in episode 106, Tamara Box shared the heuristics she uses for thinking about professional services businesses. I'm really interested to hear the sort of framework you think you use for getting your head round a new industrials business as you go in. Do you have a few key pointers that you use to orientate yourself?
Yeah, in very simple terms, you should ask yourself, number one, do I offer relevant, leading, differentiated products? And most importantly, and very often forgotten, by the way, do I continuously invest enough to make sure they're also relevant in a year, 2 or 3 years' time? Be very frank, I've seen a lot of companies in the UK completely underinvesting in R&D and new product. And it's obvious I have German background. The success of many German industrial companies are they invest in new product and new technologies, full stop, to the tune of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20% of revenue. How many companies in the UK invest that amount of money into new products or new technologies? Some do, and they're probably successful, and many don't, and they're probably one day won't find themselves on the street to success. So, number one. Number two is, how good are you operationally? Full stop. Quality, health and safety, quality, and continuous improvement in terms of productivity and cost. And that's about it. But you need people and you need a sales organization. Sure, absolutely. But these are the two key fundamentals in most manufacturing companies. You have to ask yourself, how good are you at those two, basically? And you need people who have, it's helpful to have board members who understand and can judge and can offer and can question and can sort of guide management team to think about that. And my mantra is, for example, I've come to various industrial companies now, and it's very simple. You won't be a successful manufacturing company unless you drive into your operations a productivity improvement of, call it 3 to 5% per annum. Full stop. No debate. Unless you do this, you will be running out of steam. You will be too expensive. Your quality won't be good enough or whatever. Unless you have this continuous drumbeat of operation almost sort of deeply embedded in your organization, you won't be successful on the long run. And equally, if you don't invest in the right product and get that wrong, and that's why particularly the early phase of research often is seen as cost. But there was an interesting article years ago which really sort of resonated with me. But investment in R&D is basically you create options, understand and sort of keep in touch and develop a certain technology. You still have an option if this technology one day succeeds or becomes mainstream or whatever. And if you cut it off, you kill the option. So for R&D money, and particularly the research, the early phase, is you're basically buying options for future success in an uncertain in an uncertain future, not knowing which technology will prevail, for example. But very often people look at particularly the R, which is the research side, is its cost. So those would be my two main sort of thoughts or heuristics, as you would say.
So what do you think you've learned about evaluating an organization's approach to R&D that a smart senior executive who hasn't got your board experience wouldn't appreciate?
The first question is, how much money do you invest? What is your pipeline? How good is your pipeline? But very importantly, how well do you check whether your R&D pipeline is really customer relevant or whether you just develop for the sake of developing? Those are three questions you should be able to find out.
So can you bring that to life? Customer relevant? Like how would you ascertain?
Customer relevant means basically the new product is absolutely what customers need. And we're not talking about consumer now. We're calling B2B or sort of potential business customers. Is it a product they really need? Has this been checked? Is there clear demand? How well have you checked that? For example, at IMI, when I joined IMI in 2012, the new product pipeline was basically nil. It was completely empty. We absolutely concluded we needed to start this and take some time. You can't suddenly step up from basically investing nil in engineering and new product development to 3, 4, 5%. You can't step it up. It takes 1 to 3 years. You have to build a team and whatever. Took 1 to 3 years, and we had a product pipeline. Some of the products were ultimately turned out to be successful, but quite a few didn't, because the way how we checked whether the new product was really relevant for our customer, we didn't really check it. Our people believed it would be a good idea, and that is not good enough.
You touched on health and safety earlier. Curious to hear the same lessons you've learned that a smart senior executive might not know. And because in 2018, Keller was fined following an explosion that tragically killed an employee and seriously injured another.
Yeah, Keller was basically mixing chemicals with the idea of once the chemicals have been properly mixed, they are put into flares. The flares sort of slotted into aircraft, and if a heat-seeking missile follows the aircraft, these flares are pushed out, ignited, and they have to burn at, 1,000 to 1,200 degrees in order to distract the heat-seeking missile. Which basically says, at the minute you mix these chemicals and you need one ignition, they burn at 1,200 degrees. So it's not really an explosion. It's a rapid fire, basically, but it's almost somewhere in between an explosion. It's super, super dangerous. It's absolutely maximum dangerous stuff. I joined the board in 2016 and we had a CEO and we discussed health and safety, and we believe we had a good, solid process. It turned out, no, it wasn't solid enough. 6 weeks before we had the fatality, we had brought in a new CEO because we had come to the conclusion that the previous CEO wasn't good enough. And he is an He's still the CEO at Cummings. I can only praise him because he's one of the best operators I've ever seen as a CEO, industrial operators. He is really good. He really understands how to build teams, how to guide teams, how to drive teams. And he was faced with that situation, but it was an opportunity for him, obviously. But it was a very, very terrible situation. Once you have a fatality and you feel responsible, that really weighs on you, on the whole team, on everybody, including the board, obviously. It was hugely disruptive and it was hugely costly, by the way. The operation of this particular facility was closed for 3 or 4 months. I think we lost 25 million, 30 million of profit and fines, and it was probably 30 million or so, which for a company of the size of Cummings was a substantial amount of money. It was a terrible, terrible experience. Ever since then, I think we pulled our act together. So in multiple ways, we became much more thoughtful about our processes. We drove these processes into the operations. We automated, we invested a lot of money to automate the critical operations, and so on and so forth. And so, touch wood, since 2018, we had an ever-increasing sort of safety record and no fatality.
Time is flying by. Before I come to the lightning round, I want to ask you one last question around risk and security. I had a fascinating discussion recently with someone in the defense world who made the point that everyone is very focused on AI right now, but in their mind, bigger risks exist around bioengineering, around semiconductors, around the weaponization of space that could see scenarios where satellites get taken out and governments become totally blind, but the knock-on impact on organizations. I'm really interested, given your involvement with a number of industrial organizations involved in the defense sector, what are the risks that you're seeing and thinking about that you think others not as close to that sector might be blind to?
If you look at the war in the Ukraine, it's unfolding quite differently to what everybody thought it would, for multiple reasons. First of all, it's turned out that you need huge amounts of artillery shell ammunition, basically standard, pretty traditional ammunition, massive amounts. And we neither have the industrial capacity anymore, which is currently being built up rapidly. So number one. Number two, who would have foreseen that you kill a 2 million battle tank or 3 million pound battle tank with a 2 million drone? Nobody would have foreseen. I'm not a military strategist, but I wonder whether our military strategies really factor the capability of autonomy in sufficiently, particularly if you are a potential defender rather than an aggressor. As an aggressor, you have to move forward. You need battle armored vehicles and aircraft and all sorts of stuff. If you're a defender, the Ukrainians just basically prove every day you can defend yourself if you're very imaginative and find new ways, and particularly use much cheaper stuff. So I'm not quite so sure, but somebody else has to answer that. My only concern is we're still too much into big sort of the traditional big sort of weapons of choice, aircraft, tanks, and ship or even submarine. That's my concern, and that's my experience.
But if we move away from purely the sort of defense lens, for those sitting on boards of corporate and not necessarily corporate organizations who are thinking about risks to their organization that they need to manage for, we've just been through obviously COVID pandemic, which I don't think many boards had on their radar, but it feels like with what's happening in sort of the world of bioengineering, that has to be mutations.
It's a risk. The interesting question is, how can you prepare yourself for some of these
existential risks?
Existential risks. I mean, COVID has proven that. Yes, we have learned certainly. If the next crisis comes, we are certainly better prepared in a way because we know how to handle. I'm not so sure, to be honest, and I'm not so sure how much time you want to spend on it. As a board nowadays, you're told how to basically run the board, and the list of things, including risk management, is pretty damn long. And you can spend all board meetings by basically doing whatever you are told you're doing in terms of governance and risk management. And my biggest concern is that a lot of boards, and the boards are joined. If I looked at their agenda, the agenda is always pretty much, the board agendas are pretty much the same. CEO report, CFO report, there might be another issue, a big capex decision or whatever. And yes, once a year, you probably talk about talent. And once a year, you have a strategy session. I believe that is an unbalanced agenda, to be honest. I believe the most important thing a board has to manage is it has to manage risk, okay? But you can't drive a company to success by managing risk. You have to drive a company by success by having a really understanding and working out a sound strategy. And then, most importantly, follow up on the execution of this strategy. So when I have the ability to really influence agenda as a chair, my proposal always is, what are the key strategic issues we have to deal with and we have to execute on, and make sure that at every board meeting, we have at least one major agenda item on one of these 3, 4, 5 key strategic sort of agenda item topics, avenues. So strategy and execution of strategy is somewhat on every board meeting's agenda, should be one of these items. And it should be immediately after CEO report or CFO report. That's the most important one. And you should also spend more time on talent and on people.
An inspiring call to arms for board members to be more forward-looking and add more value. God, Peter, the time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready. First up, best book every board member should read and why?
Honestly, I have no good answer other than the Bible.
Why the Bible?
Oh, it has good insights if you read it carefully.
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
Speaking too much.
Best, most valuable board ritual?
I think basically holding and saying what is really important for our business. I mean, having that moment, are we spending enough time on it?
Most significant professional insight?
I think have a really good understanding what you're good at and particularly what you're not so good at.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
Be careful with being overly diverse. And secondly, be really mindful of how you spend your time.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
In a company I joined, they were looking for a new CEO, and I was of the opinion the internal candidate would have been good, and it would have been a wrong one. So yes, judgment on people, particularly if you don't know them well, but you have to be very careful. Sometimes just reserve your judgment. If you don't believe it's sound, just say, I'm not so sure. I'm not qualified. I can't offer sound judgment. You should be able to do that.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
So I think I've learned to really think about what the boardroom's priority should be, number one. And I hope I've learned how to add value. I hope others have to judge.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
Most importantly, if you join a board, number one, really think through what the key priorities of the board agenda should be. And I would say, other than in a massive turnaround situation, it has to be about strategy and people. Hone your skill of adding or giving advice on adding or offering your opinion when you really believe your opinion and your advice can add value. And if not, don't.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Thank you, Ollie. It was a pleasure.
If you want to feel fully equipped for board conversations with expert guidance supporting you, Neuroll Plus can help. As a listener, you get 10% off. Head to plus.neuroll.com and use code ENTER at checkout.